Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Hidden Island, the one and only One Piece Jazz Lounge, bringing gentle grooves and tender tunes to me, you, and the deep all blue. And for some of you watching, welcome back. I'm glad you returned for another conversation with me today, and I gotta say, this one's gonna be worth your time, so sit back and enjoy as we begin our chat today on Luffy's very unique set of abilities. But before we begin our music, right now you're listening to a nice little song I like to call Gear 5th turns Luffy into a giant and the world government wants the Gum Gum fruit for their gigantification research. I'm sorry, that can't be correct. Actual name of the piece is in the bottom right. However, it is conveniently the subject of our video today. More specifically, we're going to explore Luffy's gears and what their endgame might be. Ever since the introduction of gears back in Enies Lobby, there's been endless speculation as to what Luffy is truly capable of with the Gum Gum fruit. In our world, most manual cars and bikes operate with 5 gears, and thus it has been long thought that Luffy's special transformations would work their way up from Gear 2nd to Gear 5th. And ever since the introduction of Gear 4th, we have seen a lot of fan-made ideas out there as to what a Gear 5th might look like. Something we can guess, aside from Devil Fruit Awakening, is the upper limit of what the Gum Gum fruit is capable of, but from basically everything I've seen, the average Gear 5th prediction usually comes off to me as some variation on Gear 4th, usually with Luffy covered head to toe in armament hockey or wrapped in rubbery springs, bonus points for giving him Super Saiyan hair or something like that. And while I think anyone's interpretation is just as valid as any other at this point, I do think those design philosophies miss the mark a bit. I think there's more to Luffy's fruit than just steam, hockey tattoos, and panda eyes. In a recent chapter, we learned from Who's Who that the Gum Gum fruit is more special than we've thought, and I personally think that's directly related to what the true ability of Luffy's Devil Fruit may actually be. So, as always, I'm going to lay out the questions that we will answer today, and we'll get right into it. Number 1, what makes the Gum Gum fruit special, and why did the world government want it so bad? 2, what is Gear 5th really? Let's start by talking about Who's Who for a second. As we've recently learned in Chapter 1017, Who's Who was a former member of CP9 considered to be on par with Rob Lucci in terms of prospects. 12 years ago, Who's Who worked a detail on a government ship guarding an important devil fruit they had in their possession. This devil fruit was then stolen off the ship by the Red Hair Pirates, a shortcoming that cost him both his career and his freedom. From there, he was thrown into Impel Down to be imprisoned and tortured, a rather severe punishment for but a single mistake. This devil fruit was none other than the Gum Gum fruit, now in the possession of Shanks, which he would shortly after take to Luffy's hometown in Fuchsia Village, and the rest is history. The question then becomes, why was Who's Who punished so harshly? He was regarded as a rival to the genius Rob Lucci, and on the surface it seems as though Lucci's failures were much greater than his. Back in Enies Lobby, under his watch, the Island of Judgment was infiltrated and destroyed. He failed to keep Nico Robin captive, and was soundly defeated by the user of that very same important devil fruit. His unit's captain, Spandam, was single-handedly responsible for the accidental Buster call on Enies Lobby, an unparalleled waste of resources and manpower, and a supreme display of incompetence. And yet, both Lucci and Spandam were not punished, they were promoted. They were given a second chance. That can only imply that Who's Who's failure to protect the Gum Gum fruit from being stolen was a blunder so great that the government's response was to resign him to Impel Down. Jokes aside, arguably a fate worse than death. This tells me that Luffy's Devil Fruit is not just the fun, stretchy power that we thought it was, that there is something particularly important about it that we have yet to see. So, what makes it so special? This. This is what makes the Gum Gum fruit a force to be reckoned with. Something so significant and essential to the world government's agenda that losing it to pirates is a cardinal sin. Of all the races in the world of One Piece, the various races of giants are the most physically powerful. So powerful, in fact, that nations around the world for hundreds of years have been searching for the secret to gigantification, a process that could ideally turn normal-sized humans into giants. There has been endless experimentation conducted under the government's orders, fruitlessly, no pun intended, which both Vegapunk and Caesar were heavily involved in. Covert sections of the government and black market operations, Mother Carmel being the main example, have been recruiting giants into the Marines for the better half of a century, something so high in priority that even Cypherpole agents are submissive to her authority. All of this for the purpose of building unstoppable armies, and thankfully up until now, research on gigantification has been entirely unsuccessful. But What if there was a devil fruit out there that could turn you into a giant? Now that Vegapunk is working with the government pioneering devil fruit research, it may be just the thing they need to solve the mystery of gigantification. Back to Luffy. Gear Third is an ability Luffy first demonstrated in his fight against Rob Lucci, where he blows air into his bones and turns his limbs gigantic. Interestingly, however, it's not like his arms are just full of air. They seem to multiply in strength, and his attacks while in Gear Third not only look the part, but also hit with the raw power of the giants. In this state, Luffy is capable of splitting warships in half and smashing holes through buildings. While unmastered, this ability has its drawbacks, but over time, Luffy has managed to use Gear Third without any immediate physical repercussions. It doesn't even shorten his lifespan in the way that Gear Second does. That is what makes Luffy's Devil Fruit so special. It has the upward potential to gigantify its user without any caveats, tricks, or roundabout methods. Other Devil Fruits can produce large beings or turn the user into something gigantic, but there's always an extra step involved or some element that doesn't quite fit the bill for gigantification. Morj can become huge, but only at the heavy cost of absorbing thousands of shadows from those around him. Sengoku can become a giant Buddha statue, but that's not really what they're looking for either. Robin can produce giant limbs and such, but those are only copies of her formed by smaller interwoven hands. San Juan Wolf seems to have eaten a devil fruit that makes him larger, but since we have no clue what the fruit is or how it functions exactly, I can't really speak to that. My guess is, however, that it's not just a size-changing fruit. All of the Blackbeard Pirates' devil fruits are related to trickery in some way, whether it's Katarina's shape-shifting, or Shiryu's invisibility, or Lafitte's hypnosis, so I don't think this trend stops at Wolf. As far as I can tell, the Gum Gum fruit is the only devil fruit that has allowed Luffy to make at least parts of his body into that of the fabled giants. There's no catch, just a little bit of air, maybe a sprinkle of hockey, and boom, now you can kick a ship in half. And in the eyes of the government, this ability may be the key to solving the gigantification mystery, which brings us to Gear 5th, or as I hope it will be called, Top Gear. Gear 5th, the ultimate power in Luffy's arsenal, and the true ability of the Gum Gum fruit, is the power to become a giant. Not just an arm or a leg, the whole deal. Luffy will become a giant, maybe even as large as the ancient giants, like Oars and Oars Jr. But more on that in a bit. Let's look at the evidence present. First, we'll focus on the logical reasoning. Look at how Luffy's gears have evolved up until now. Gear 2nd. Luffy forces more blood into his elastic heart and blood vessels, essentially ballooning his veins and increasing blood flow. Gear 3rd. Luffy forces air into his bones, which also have rubber properties, greatly expanding his limb size. He calls this bone balloon. Gear 4th. Luffy does the same with his muscles instead, calling this muscle balloon, and then infuses his muscles with armament haki. This essentially vulcanizes his rubbery body, which is a real-world process used to make rubber hard and resilient. You can see the result of this in the tires on your car. So in simpler terms, blood or heart balloon, bone balloon, and then muscle balloon. What is the logical final step? Well, full body balloon. Now if it happens to be brain balloon or something, it was fun while it lasted, but the sensible conclusion for Luffy's gears is to balloon his entire body altogether rather than just a certain part. And while we're talking about balloons, let's talk about Big Mom. We learned on Onigashima that the reason Kaido and Big Mom are practically invincible to normal attacks is because they infuse Conqueror's haki into their body. And in the arc prior, Whole Cake Island, what is Big Mom described as? An iron balloon. Gear 4th is only possible because Luffy infuses armament haki into his muscles, but what if he were to use Conqueror's haki instead? The ability to completely become a giant through those means would easily put Luffy on the same level as someone like Whitebeard or Roger. He would be a force of nature. Keeping this wordplay train going, what about the natures of gears and how they were introduced? Gears 2 and 3 were given to us pre-time skip, Gears 4 and 5 post-time skip. Gears 2 and 4 were both introduced in a very similar way, both emit steam and change Luffy's skin color. At the current point in the story, Gear 4th no longer seems to have any drawbacks, and as a result completely and utterly outclasses Gear 2nd. It's faster, stronger, more versatile, more dangerous, more threatening, and more defensive than Gear 2nd ever was. It's a straight upgrade in every possible sense. With Gear 4th, Luffy essentially took Gear 2nd and bumped it up another level through the use of Haki. We have yet to see the same happen to Gear 3rd though. Gear 3rd arguably produces the strongest attacks in Luffy's arsenal, typically being the gear Luffy ends his fights with, but in most scenarios it's just too slow. It's telegraphed, it's unwieldy, and not very useful until the target is a sitting duck. There's still room for improvement in this department, something we're already starting to see happen against Kaido. It's important to note that Luffy tends to develop his abilities in response to the threats and environments he faces. He learns by observation and adaptation. Gear 2nd was a direct product of the Rokushiki abilities of CP9. Gear 4th was developed in order to fight the large and resilient creatures of Ruskaina, Snake Man, a response to Katakuri's future sight, so on and so forth. If Luffy continued with a pattern of upgrading and outclassing his old gears post-time skip through the use of Haki, Gear 3rd is next in line. 4 and 5 will outclass 2 and 3. And this time, it'll be Conqueror's Haki that he uses, a skill he learned straight from the Emperors themselves. Even more interesting, if we assume that the next island in the story after Wano is Elbaf, the Land of Giants. What will he learn there? Now folks, here's the perspective from a writing standpoint on why this all makes perfect sense. One Piece is well known for its crazy character proportions. Something Oda loves doing is making larger-than-life characters physically large and imposing, making their physical presence just as grand as their reputation. It's part of the romanticism of the story. Nearly all the major players in the world of One Piece are physically imposing and threatening just by appearances alone. If Oda wants someone to look powerful, he makes them huge. Simple. This is something he does all the time, and it is something he seems to be setting up for future characters like Joy Boy. If this hat was Joy Boy's, then Joy Boy was also a very large guy. Many of the endgame elements of One Piece are centered around an increase in scale in general, bigger and stronger characters, bigger enemies, bigger armies, bigger stakes, so on and so forth. And as Luffy began to fight stronger and more dangerous opponents, Gear 4th made up for it by nearly doubling his physical size. If Luffy is to become the king of the pirates, he will have to, somehow, reflect that in a visual way. Going back to when they first entered the Grand Line, there was a lot of setup in Little Garden for something greater to come down the road relating to the Giants. Especially considering that both Usopp and Luffy took a really deep liking to the Giants, their fighting spirit and their courage, Luffy specifically seemed to hold a lot of admiration for them, pretty much constantly in awe of their sheer size and power. Ever since then, Luffy has been seen emulating their physiognomy at least partially through Gear 3rd. A hint of such to come can be seen in the Ogon rifle used to defeat Enel. And while fast explosive attacks coming from Gears 2 and 4 carry a lot of fights forward, nearly every major fight post-time skip has involved Luffy ending it with a massive Gear 3rd based punch of some kind. Elephant Gatling, Grizzly Magnum, King Kong Gun, King Cobra. Ending fights with a bang is the way that Luffy rolls, and I wouldn't be surprised if the fight with Kaido ends in a comparable fashion. And it naturally should. Gear 3rd is arguably the most powerful when it comes to raw strength, but it is also the least useful out of Luffy's power-ups. It can only be effectively used at the end of a fight after all the heavy lifting has already been done. Luffy still has yet to truly master fighting like a giant, despite having to fight nigh invincible behemoths left and right ever since the Yonko saga kicked off. Elbaf, the Land of Giants, being placed on the last leg of the journey to Pirate King was no coincidence. Neither is the history of gigantification a coincidence, and neither is Luffy's Devil Fruit being special to the world government a coincidence. Think about it. If Morj's theory is right, link in the description, Shanks is directly connected to Elbaf and the Giants, and if I'm right, the Gum Gum Fruit has the power to make someone a giant. A power the world government wants. A power contained in a devil fruit stolen by. And if you're still not convinced after all this, let's look at what is, in my opinion, the biggest hint that Oda has left for us. Folks, let's take a quick ride back to Thriller Bark. It's commonly accepted at this point that Thriller Bark foreshadowed a lot of the story to come, and more specifically Gear 4 through the introduction of Nightmare Luffy. Nightmare Luffy is very similar to Gear 4th in a lot of ways, from the physical appearance down to the sheer strength and fighting style. It took what Luffy could do and scaled it up a level, something we wouldn't see again until Dressrosa. But what if I were to tell you that Oda may have also foreshadowed Gear 5th in the same arc? I think we have already gotten a sneak peek of what's to come, but where in Thriller Bark can we find a giant Luffy? I always found it interesting that Oda chose to introduce Oars, this continent puller, and have Luffy fight him in the same part of the story. That Oda chose to take Luffy's shadow and put it in the body of an ancient giant. In the story, Oars becomes Luffy's zombie. Luffy's shadow was placed in a behemoth, and it turned out to be a good fit. It's not long before this massive Goliath begins developing Luffy's stretching powers. Naturally, as a result of the shadow, his attacks and stature emulate Luffy, and we begin to see how devastating even a walking corpse of that size can be when Luffy's powers are behind the wheel. In a subtle way, Oda also shows us that something like Gear 4th would not be enough to match this kind of power, since it's not Nightmare Luffy that finally downs Oars, but a bazooka from Gear 3rd that does the deed. I don't think that it's a coincidence who Oda chose to match each of the monster trio up with for their fights. They all seem to illuminate something new about the characters and foreshadow their progression down the road. Sanji fights an invisible man. Zoro fights the corpse of his likely ancestor Ryuma, and Luffy fights an ancient giant. Even more interesting that Oda later chose to introduce Little Oars Jr., a distant relative of the Oars that Luffy fought, who just so happened to be a friend of Ace's, and also just so happened to wear a hat made of straw. That's a big Oars-sized wink-wink, nudge-nudge from Oda if I've ever seen it. While we were so focused on all the other foreshadowing and new information Thriller Bark threw at us, Oda was also planting the seeds for Luffy's future and the true nature of his devil fruit through the introduction of Oars and the ancient giants. No matter how you interpret all this, this is the conclusion I can't help but come to. Gear 5th, the culmination of all the Gum Gum Fruit's capabilities, is Luffy expanding his entire body all at once to become a giant. Fully harnessing the power of the giants is a hand-over-fist upgrade from Gear 3rd, a potentially terrifying power, and an obvious reason as to why the world government placed such high importance on the Gum Gum Fruit. If they want to figure out the secret to gigantification, that fruit held the key. And if Shanks truly has deep ties to Elbaf, then even more reason for him to steal that same devil fruit from the government's hands. Luffy inherited more than just his hat from Shanks. He inherited the power of giants, and soon after 12 years, both that hat and that power will be returning to Elbaf, where Shanks is waiting. And that's all for today, folks. Thank you once again for landing on the Hidden Island. Please like and subscribe for more content just like this in the future, and let me know what you think down below. What do you think Gear 5th will be? I'd love to hear it. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed the show, because we sure enjoyed putting it on. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, have a beautiful day, a pleasant night, and a wonderful romanced dawn.